Well, no matter where you are in the world, it seems like communication and struggling to communicate is a topic and something that people are interested in. So that was why when I saw Charles Duhigg's book, Supercommunicators, first of all, I had read his other books, The Power of Habit, and loved them and referenced them a lot in my research. And when I saw this one, I got it right away. And uh, technically, I listened to it and then bought it and said, you know what, there's a lot of really powerful stuff in here. This needs to be our next book club book. So I'm glad that everybody is feeling equally interested in it. Let's jump in and start the conversation because you're not here to listen to me talk. Um, where I thought we'd start is one of the kind of core concepts that he lays out early in the book is this concept of there are different kinds of conversations. Let me check my notes for exactly what kind they are. Decision-making conversations, emotional conversations, and social and identity um, conversations. Curious what people thought about that. I know I had a reaction, but did that make sense? Did it seem weird, limited?
I'd agree with you. I think that makes a bunch of sense. I mean, certainly when you're talking to different people about different scenarios, you know, timing is everything in a lot of these situations. And so being able to talk to somebody about a particular situation, I remember Megan us being coached back in the day to ask people if they were ready for a coaching conversation before just going straight in there and having it. I certainly know when I'm talking to my wife or my kids, there's a good time to ask them a particular question. There's another time when perhaps it's not. And so I think laying the right groundwork for that and getting the timing right, it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And the idea that a conversation is not necessarily about what it's about, that in reality, you know, you could have what looks like um, a one-on-one meeting for business that is actually an emotional conversation or an identity conversation. That really got me thinking about conversations I've had and said, okay, what were we really talking about there? Especially with spouses and children. Other folks, hang on, let me admit we have a couple new people.
I thought the framework was really, really helpful. I've definitely had that sense of being in conversations where I know I'm having a different conversation than the person I'm speaking with. And I think it's happened much more in business contexts. And I think the one that happens over and over again for me is when I'm encountering someone who might be a little bit more black and white about things and is, you know, every conversation is about making a decision. We just want to get through a flow chart maybe as fast as we can on things. Whereas I'm coming at things from, all right, let's get a common understanding here so we know what we are talking about. And then we can go from there to maybe make decisions or consult others or whatever. So I would have never, you know, separated it into the categories that Charles did, but it's really helpful. And I definitely remember the words understanding, and that's, you know, that's what I lead with, and decision making, which seems to be what a lot of folks I work with lead with. So it's very just very helpful to know that so I can maybe temper how I'm approaching things.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that struck me was that in a lot of conversations with people that you don't necessarily work with regularly, that you have to have a conversation about how you're going to make decisions before you make the decision. So sometimes the argument over the decision is actually an argument over how you're going to make the decision, which can be emotional or identity. So yeah,
And
absolutely.
hopefully the person you're speaking with can go along on the ride with you with that, because sometimes they really just can't.
Yeah, sometimes they can't. Anybody else want to share thoughts about that framework? The next question, and we can go right into that I had was thinking about um, if you're going into one of those conversations of any type, this concept of thinking about it ahead of time and preparing what you're going to say, that is something that I instinctively have always done. I saw a post on Instagram last night from an extrovert friend that said, do introverts really plan every conversation ahead of time? And I'm like, the possible conversations, the conversations will never happen. I'm replanning the past conversation. Yeah, like, of course we do this. But just talking a little bit about how do we actually prepare for conversations and how can we bring some of the tips from the book into that. If you want to use the raise your hand feature, go ahead. I believe it is under React. You certainly don't have to.
I liked the idea that they shared in the book about identities and social identities. And prior to joining a group, if you're aware of who they all are, is just going to have that as a backdrop to know we all are coming from different social identities, and then bringing together a group identity that you all share.
Yeah, that is probably one of the most underestimated concepts in change influence, is the role that identity plays in people's behavior. I had a client once who was a former Accenture consultant, and he was a practitioner at a company. And we went in to give a presentation to his executive team about why he needed more staff for his customer experience team. And it was brilliant. He started the conversation with, if we were really a customer-centric company, would we? And then he listed 6 things that were actually happening that were tiny, but so ridiculous. Like, we only provide half as many envelopes as we do bills. Like, we only provide an envelope every other bill. And the executive team was horrified because that created a dissonance between who they see themselves and the behavior that was being pointed out. And the natural instinct to close that identity, to close that gap and get your self-image right, is hugely powerful. But yes, it's also important, Suzanne, just for understanding, not just for persuasion. So other things.
I would echo that because I feel that the social identity wove itself through all the different components of understanding the why and who we are. You know, most recently I'd read The Anti-Vaxxer, and I live in Texas. There's a big measles outbreak here. And so it was just interesting in terms of how they're approaching it and really trying to identify and not immediately start to isolate themselves as the physician and also the patient or the parent or what have you. But that was woven in from the onset with some of the other examples that they provided with the the negotiator, really turning the conversation around, getting to know the person, and really people wanting to be heard.
Yeah, I agree. And first of all, stay healthy and stay safe. I was exposed to measles a couple of years ago, and you can actually go get your immunity level checked. If you had your vaccine as a kid, you can actually go get it checked to see if you're still immune. So, public service announcement. But yeah, I think that not jumping to conclusions, but also accepting, I think, or trying to find positive intent, assuming that this is not a horrible human being and that they have reasons, even if you disagree with those reasons. I'm curious, how do people find out obviously if you're talking to people that you already know really well, but I know some of you better than others. How do you find out or pick up on pieces of somebody's identity? I'll give you a hint. Asking where you all are geographically was part of that. But I always do that. Oh. The notion of asking someone the goal of the conversation. Yes. Do you want advice, or do you want to just be listened to? That was one I've used at home.
Sometimes understanding what people like to do and how they spend their personal time for enjoyment sometimes helps give insight into who they could be and relate to what you said about the positive intent and just trying to stay on that positive note with others, as you learn about them.
Yeah, absolutely, Suzanne. That's actually one of the arguments for having that kind of idle chit chat at the beginning of a meeting. But also I was at a did anybody ever work with Clarabridge? They were a text analytics company. So I spoke at I keynoted their conference some years back, and the entertainment was an 80s cover band called the Leg Warmers. They were excellent. And they didn't force, but they invited everyone to dress up as their favorite 80s character. The CEO at the time, Sid Banerjee, came as Axl Rose. He had like fake tattoo sleeves and things. One person came as Richard Simmons. The number of professionals in that room who had been heavy metal lovers in their teen and college years, who would never in a million years have guessed that about each other, and the bonding that happened because of that. It was a profound experience, even with people that I had known for years and years, because we connected on this totally different level. And it was random. My sense of those people's identity now and theirs of mine, I would never have guessed in a million years. Yes, I had really, really big hair in the 80s. There is photographic proof, but it's not online.
I was going
What
to.
about link? Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say a little bit on that last topic of getting to understand where people are coming from. I very often, especially when I don't know somebody, will ask those kinds of questions. Just what are your goals? What do you find is most important in a general sense? Again, the business context, and sometimes you get a lot of the cliche answers. Well, I'm a team player and I'm results driven, but you carry that conversation a little bit further and you really do find out what the motivators are for someone. And it can really help in the way to not manipulate, honestly, but to couch a conversation so that, you can come to more of, well, at least what I always want, that common understanding.
Yeah, and I thought some of the alternative questions that he suggested in the book, different ways to phrase questions, were not something that I would have ever thought of. And I haven't done it yet, but I wanted to make a cheat sheet of those and like hang it up on my office wall so that as I'm in a conversation, I can think of using those questions. I'm trying to remember an example of one of them. I'm not at the moment, but you guys are nodding your heads, so you remember what I was talking about.
Yeah.
I wanted to do the same thing, Megan, because I felt like there were a sprinkling of great things that I can weave in and incorporate, but it's kind of spread throughout the book. I'm hoping I have not read that last chapter, so I'm really hoping that will help synthesize some of it. I was going to just add one more thing. One thing that I often do is when I'm trying to understand people's goals, and again, this isn't a professional setting, is how can I help you achieve your goals? And by kind of flipping the conversation again, and it seems to be like, oh, okay, well, this is how you can help me, and a little more revealing, and then you can just keep digging into the conversation.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I will sometimes when I've asked it in that open-ended way, people get a little overwhelmed. So sometimes I will ask like, what's one thing I can do that would help you the most right now? And that's usually an easier question for people to answer. But yeah, absolutely, asking them what they need. Michael, you came off mute, so I'm guessing you wanted to chime in or no? Just hit the button.
Just want to, be a little more present because I was trying to get something set up. But no, if I were to add, for sure, the questions that inspire a conversation throw people sometimes for the loop of, oh, I didn't realize you're going to, put me on the spot almost. But it also helps them get warm enough to say, oh, if you're really that interested in me, and then all of a sudden you see, or sometimes they go way beyond what you even imagined, but they just needed the door open. And how do you get warm to that is sometimes always interesting to find because everyone's door is a little bit different is the way I look at it. And you just try to, open it up a little bit with a probing question, allowing them to feel comfortable and safe enough to be able to talk further.
Yeah, I love that, especially from a safety perspective. I was doing some stakeholder interviews with a group of executives about next gen customer centricity. So they're like, we're customer centric. We want to be more customer centric. What would that look like? And the last question I asked in all the interviews is, what are you worried about? Why is being more how would being more customer centric be a bad thing? And no one had ever asked, no one had ever even floated the idea that being customer centric was bad. That was like blasphemy. And I'm like, no, a little too much of anything is not great. And so they were both taken aback, but I think also appreciated the opportunity to express their concerns and risks without feeling like they were being, kind of like the gun control debate, that they were, not being thrown into category of people who don't care about customers. Yeah, and opening that door.
I think a lot of folks look at almost everything like a zero-sum game as well. So wait, if we're going to increase customer service here, customer experience, we must be taking away from something else. And I want to protect that because that's important to our business.
Yeah, I think that mindset has, to a certain extent, always been there and is increasingly appearing that it's either a binary or it's a zero-sum game.
One of the snippets that I heard that I wrote down when I was going through the book was qualifying whether somebody wants to be heard, whether they want to be hugged, or whether they want to be helped. And I thought, for me, as a friend, as a parent, as a colleague in certain situations, I have definitely gone into those conversations trying to help when that's not what they're looking for at all. So yeah, that for me, I mean, it's so obvious, but it certainly, I'm happy to, put my hand up and say I often get it wrong, and it's such an easy question to ask just to get the tone and get the structure right.
Yeah, Doug agrees that he has also stepped in that one at home, as have I, as a natural fixer and problem solver. Yeah, I had forgotten about that, heard, hugged, or helped. That's another one. I want to mention, Nicole, you sparked an idea in me that I want to get all of our AI note takers to hold me accountable for. Let's crowdsource a Google Doc with all those questions. Since we're all looking at them, if people took notes, like I said, I listened to the book originally, so I hadn't highlighted things. I'll create a Google Doc and send out the link to the follow-up, and we can kind of put all those questions in, and I'll have Kate go through and deduplicate. But it'll almost be like our own little Supercommunicators cheat sheet. And that way we won't all have to go through the entire book.
I
Let's
love
talk a little.
that. Oh, sorry. And I love the idea of, for me, the simple switch was from what to how. So like, I know as I start training and do things with lots of folks, I say, I'm trying to root them in experiences. I'll say things like, what was your favorite trip? Or what's one of the favorite trips that you've ever been on? And I'm just thinking to myself, having read it and hearing this discussion, if it's not what, it's how did you feel when you went on your favorite trip, or what made it your favorite trip? Just that little, like the what to how.
Yeah, I love that. And the how did you feel about, I think is really powerful. Katie, remind me what organization you're with. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm having a little button trouble here. That's okay.
That's
I'm with C&N, so we're a community bank.
Okay. I didn't know if travel was part of it or if that was like an icebreaker question. But yeah,
It's an icebreaker question where I want folks to start thinking from the customer perspective. When was I in a really important experience? How did I feel in that moment?
Yeah, Yeah, Nicole just shared the quote from Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said and what you did, but never forget how you made them feel. I actually ended a keynote with that when I was at Forrester, one of the main stage keynotes, and people still come up to me and tell me that it was a keynote on emotion, and that emotion is relevant in customer experience. So that is absolutely one of my favorite quotes. One of the things that he brought up too, and this came up, Doug, you were on this call. I don't know if anybody else was on this call. A couple months ago, we did Can You Hear Me, which is a book about virtual communication. It was actually written in 2018, before the pandemic, and it was a book about how the experience of communicating and collaborating virtually and through technology is different and how we can make it suck less. And one of the things we talked about a lot in that discussion was nonverbal cues. I found out that I am not the only one who picks up my pen and touches it to my face so people know I'm taking notes and not multitasking on my phone. So felt a little better that I'm not the only one that does that. But I'd love to talk a little bit about some of those cues, especially as we're working with people. You know, we've got people here from California to Hong Kong. As we're working across cultures. How is that factored in? Okay, you realize that your silence is a nonverbal cue that I am now interpreting. So no, that's okay.
Stand in the silence. So I am gonna jump in and say I think probably what I said in the call on that book. When I do this, looking at my wrist, everybody around me knows that I'm bored and I'm looking at the time and I can't wait to get out of this meeting, right? Well, no, that's not always the case. Sometimes I received an alert and I want to see, is my heart rate too high? You know, does my wife need something in an emergency or whatever might come through there? And then when I pick up this little iPhone and do this, everybody knows I'm texting, right? No, I'm taking some notes. Like somebody just said something really important and I don't want to miss it. And if I'm doing this, I'm answering email. It's amazing to me those, those go-tos, which who knows, they might be true most of the time. They're certainly true some of the time, but they're not true all the time. And yet, if I do those actions, I know I might receive the judgment of you're doing the thing I think you're doing, not the thing you're actually doing.
Yeah, one of our former colleagues, James TJ Kitt, was a super, super early adopter of BlackBerry. So before anybody else had a smartphone, with the exception of a couple of real early adopters, TJ had a BlackBerry and he would take notes on it. And he faced that so much because having a device and typing on it in a meeting was totally not normalized back then. So
probably looked like a Game Boy.
But if you knew TJ, you knew that this was like part of his identity, that he was a BlackBerry guy.
But I mean, similarly, even though I have an AI note take, I don't know whether it's on this one or not, in my thousands different email addresses I've got these days, I still type out an awful lot of what I'm hearing. And like very candidly, I have ADHD, and so for me to not blurt stuff out, so a lot of the time I have to write down not what the other person's saying, what I need to remember, what I want to say, when if I can hold myself back for a split second without blurting it out. And then I color code everything as I'm going through. I have different like the stuff that I really want to remember versus the stuff I need to follow up on. And for me, regardless of the AI note taker, it enables me to like it's a version of active listening to make sure that I'm taking down the key components of the meeting. So if I need to just go back to a thing, it's like those are the bullet points. And it's got to a point where people say, James, you always take the notes. Can you just send me your takeaways afterwards? Because you always get the most salient elements. And so, yeah, perhaps I'm like some sort of bored AI note taker or something that people should be leveraging more.
No, that's an amazing system.
But I meant to say before I started blathering, I often have to start a meeting with saying, by the way, I do take a lot of notes. And so if you see me like this, it's because I'm writing down what you're talking about and making sure that I'm catching the conversation. I'm not multitasking.
Yeah. And it's funny when we talk about this can go to personal brand, but also brand. An assumption that somebody makes about you based on one behavior filters how they interpret all your other behavior, right? I think it's called the fundamental attribution error, that if a stranger cuts you off in traffic, you think they're a jerk, but if your friend cuts you off in traffic, you figure they must be upset about something, right? We always ascribe it to someone's character when we don't know them and to the situation when we do. So setting the context in the beginning and saying, yes, I take a lot of notes, prevents you from kind of being judged unfairly on other things. Other folks?
I think I just have to say this. I find the other thing that happens, you mentioned a person in a car. A person in a car becomes a part of the car as an object. They lose almost all of their personality, unless, of course, you happen to know them and they're in a hurry. And I find our behavior is maybe worse or as bad on the highways as it sometimes is in social media because of the anonymity. It's like that's not a person with a family. That's a car, and that car cut me off. Yeah.
Yeah, it's never a car that cuts you off. Well, normally it's not a car that cuts you
Right.
off. It's a person driving the car. Who knows where that's going to go?
Right.
And that's a whole nother conversation about nonverbal gestures that we won't get into um, when you're driving. Are there things that I'm looking at my notes right now. Thank you, James. I should tell everybody I'm looking at the questions and we're kind of bouncing back and forth between the two. So I'm just going to kind of freestyle leading the conversation. James, you were talking about writing out what you wanted to say during the conversation or before. One of the things that I've always struggled with is when I have something specific I want to say, and like 4 words into the conversation, it takes a total left turn and doesn't go the way I thought it would, and kind of recovering in that moment. Have other folks had experiences with that? Because from the book, it sounds like these people who are super communicators are really able to pivot in the moment very quickly. And I don't know if anybody has any tips. Other than breathing.
I'd like to say that it's as easy as it looks when people are on the news, like Savannah Guthrie and the way she brings people back around, or others. I would say I attempt to do that in meetings, to lean into what they've just said and then try to rally that with something that's related back to what you really want to discuss. Not always the easiest thing, right? So I suppose sometimes I probably hit the mark and other times I don't, but I always like to watch how the people on the news are able to do that effortlessly. And I think they show a good example on how to do that well.
They do. And Susanna, I'm so glad you brought that up because it reminded me, I used to have a masterclass subscription, and the single best masterclass I watched out of any of them was from George Stephanopoulos.
Oh, really?
Who is a former White House communications director and co-anchor of Good Morning America. And it was all about how he preps for interviews. Robin Roberts has one too. Hers is a little bit less focused on interviewing and more focused on sort of bringing yourself to the table. But the one with George was very much about exactly how he does that brilliant thing that he does. I don't know if it's still up there, but you might be interested if you have masterclass in watching that, because that was a really, really good one.
Okay.
Plus, I just find his voice very soothing for some reason.
Ironically, I find that the more I consciously prepare for a meeting, the less flexible I can be that way. I mean, I'm always impressed by newscasters and talk show hosts and all sorts of other folks as well. But if I know a topic really well organically, and I don't prepare as much because I don't have to. It just flows so much easier. And I keep trying to find those ways. This thing that I don't know that well right now, how can I feel more comfortable? Can I plan for I'll plan for 5 different ways the conversation will go, and it'll go a sixth, seventh, or eighth. You just, how do I do
Yeah,
that?
totally with you. A lot of the planning I do, I don't necessarily use it in the call or the discussion. I do it to build the confidence about the various different ways the conversation might go. And I was always coached to think about what is the most difficult question I could be asked in this conversation, and how would I prepare myself to answer it. And you might not have to have an answer for it, but at least be aware of it. Like, what is the worst thing that could happen? Then after that, kind of everything's all right. And so that there's plenty of situations where you walk into a potentially intimidating scenario, but because you've done the groundwork, it you can be more comfortable in just being yourself and flowing, because you're not worried about what might be coming in from left field, or less worried about what might be coming in from left field.
Good point. Good point.
I love that, James. Hopefully the AI will pull out that ask what's the hardest question you could possibly get, because that's a great prep question for speaking, stage speaking and conversations. And just for a little bit of background, James and I used to work together at Forrester, and you're at Bain now. And so we are very often in situations where we're talking to brand new companies in brand new industries that we don't necessarily know that well. And so walking into those kinds of conversations and thinking about, okay, how can I educate myself something on their business and their market? I know I'm not going to be as educated as they are on it. But something as simple as, scanning industry newsletters or looking at what people have posted or commented on in their LinkedIn, just to have something relevant to the conversation, especially when you're new to a domain. I've always found that helpful. You got to do it in an authentic way, like those emails that say, "I love your most recent post on blah blah blah." It's like, yeah, well, I totally know you're doing that.
Quick question for you, Megan, on communication. I've noticed, I think 3 times now in this conversation, you've referred to AI picking something up, almost like the way in a meeting that the person who's taking notes, it's like, well, Sam, make a note of this. Have you found that when you do that, the AI note taker does perk up, pay attention, and actually capture that? Or are you just expressing your hopes?
I'm not sure that I've ever done that before, Doug.
I'd love
Quite
to know
frankly,
how it turns out.
I will absolutely let you know. Um, that's a great question. We will turn to people, if we have the luxury of having a note taker in a meeting, we would turn to them and say, hey, can you make sure you write that down? James says he knows people who do that, and it seems to work.
It feels like that's what you're doing. It's just the parallel. Yeah.
Yeah, like some people, they'll use the word gotcha, and they'll do that to track back to the AI.
Oh.
Gotcha.
So having like a code word
Yeah.
that you can use, almost like tagging as you go.
Mhm.
Oh.
So that's not like a pre-planned word with the AI, like we're going to use this. It's just they can find it in the transcript.
Yeah,
Or
yeah. Maybe it's a pre-programmed. I don't know. I'm not that sophisticated with AI yet.
I'm not either, and I
That's
want to get
so
there.
Perhaps.
helpful.
It's
That's
probably a
so
genetic
helpful.
way for AI to actually pay attention, because lots of people say gotcha, right? So if they're gonna, and that's going to be repeated. Did you hear me? Gotcha, right? So then that could be a reinforcement in the AI algorithm to say, pay more attention to that. I do think it would be interesting to see if even other things like Megan did, right? If it comes back and reinforces it, because if you said it 5 times, that's again another way for the AI algorithm to say this must be important. So, and even right now, as we're repeating it, there should be a big section on what we're talking about right now, you would imagine, but we'll see.
Yeah. I'm going to do a post on LinkedIn asking people if they do special things to help them use the notes from their AI note taker, because I honestly have no idea, and I'm not terribly sophisticated with it either. Katie, you seem super excited about this trick of using a code word. And I like gotcha because it has context in the conversation. When you first said it, I thought you meant gotcha. And I'm like, huh? But it actually means, okay, gotcha. And that's when you know that what was just said was something that you needed to remember. So yeah, you wouldn't want it to be like purple potato or something. It could be, but. Has anybody ever heard of a book called Exactly What to Say by Phil Jones? I have 2 copies. Hang on one second. So I met Phil through the National Speakers Association. He's a great guy, and he has several of these books, and they are all about, like he literally gives you, and I'm trying to find one that makes sense. Phrases to use, and he talks and it's not a heavy reading book. It's very light. Just imagine is one of them. And he's got other things like how to check in with somebody without making them feel guilty, or saying something like, this might not be for you, but as a way when you're offering somebody something and giving them permission to say no right off. I have actually created my own cheat sheet from this book with variations of this that I also have. If you notice these phrases in my emails, that's where they come from, full transparency. But especially in situations where you're not quite sure what to say or how to phrase it. Phil's book is, and I don't make a commission on this, but it's a really, really good reference for that.
But it's fascinating how those things can work. Sorry, after you, Katie.
Oh, that's okay. I didn't capture, so exactly what to say. You said Phil, and I missed the last name.
Phil M. Jones.
Okay, thank you.
James, he's Brit. Hello, Brit. I don't know. I'm surprised you haven't run into him. He's kind of everywhere. But yeah, I am only 5:45 on Audible. I am someone who prepares for conversations, and especially if they're emotional conversations or things that I'm nervous about, even if I don't end up using the phrases that I've prepared, having almost like a little script to say, this is how I would use this, in written as well as oral communication, that actually tamps my anxiety down. Believe it or not, I do actually deal with anxiety fairly often. And that helps me tamp down my anxiety before conversations. I want to shift real quickly to a topic that I've been working on a lot lately, and that other people, I've been talking to other people and they're very interested in, which is this concept of silos. And I think most of us have worked in large corporations in this concept of silos. And I feel like the conversation around identity and silos are virtually the same thing. So I've got a couple of clients right now who have just been through a big reorg, and the identity affiliations that people have are still very much with their old groups and not with their new groups. And there's this whole like affiliation bonding, shifting of the identities to new silos that I know, will ultimately end up happening. And I'm just curious if people have had experience with, bridging those gaps or communicating. My first job, I was a systems engineer for AT&T. I was a requirements engineer. And so I worked in the development organization and talked to the business about what they wanted us to develop. And the way I've described that job henceforth and forever is that I was a marriage counselor between the business and the developers, because that's basically what it was. I'm curious if anybody else has, not only, I know you've been in that situation, but how does this concept of identity help you think differently about how you might bridge or broker those conversations?
I think I think you need to be a bit careful there. I think there's an element between what their goal might be versus what their identity is. And so their silo requires a thing, and as a unit, they are expected to do A, B, and C. But the person within there, maybe they do or don't identify with that silo. Perhaps they are trying to, that then actually they're trying to disrupt it, or they're in a positive way, or and so I think I'd be a little bit curious about trying to work out what that person's identity was, as opposed to assuming that they were linked to the silo from a approach perspective. Or maybe I sort of misunderstood your question.
No, James, that's a completely fair point. And you bring up, it's actually a great point. And you bring up the fact that people have multiple identities and which one is sort of dominant in a situation, we don't necessarily want to assume. It's a good warning.
Yeah, because I imagine a lot of people work with somebody who say, I wear many hats, and I'm sort of here to talk to you about this one as opposed to that one. Maybe we should all be thinking about how overt we should be about, I work for this department or I do this, but in actual fact today I'd like to explore this thing and I'm here because I'm curious, or I don't get it, or I want you to help me understand, or maybe that helps us to think more about how it's easier for others to engage with us.
I love that. So thinking more consciously about which aspect of our identity we lead with when we go into a conversation. I love that. And that just made me think of something that has immediately gone in one brain cell and out the other. I will come back to it. It will come back to me.
While you're scanning your disk drive, you brought up this conversation of identity, and you didn't say the one word which goes with identity that the author brought out that just honestly blew my mind. It's identity threat. I've never heard of that concept before. And I realized, and you're all hearing this theme at least for a third or fourth time for me now, it's where I've definitely gotten into hot water before. So I believe the identity I lead with is, well, how do we make something better? Continuous improvement, sort of let's work together to make something even better. And I found in some situations, usually it's the older, more established companies, maybe a little bit more risk averse, insurance. I'll encounter a person who leads with the identity of, we're great at what we do. We are rock solid. This ship is just going to keep on going in the night. And so there is a real kind of conflict set up there between all is well and status quo is the way we want to go, and how can we make this better? And I found that, sure, I feel some of the threat of, well, we just don't care to make things better is what I'm hearing. And the person I'm talking to is often hearing, you guys suck. You need to improve in this way. And that's not a great place to start a conversation.
Yeah, Doug, that resonates immensely. One of the ways that I kind of describe my approach to change and strategy, I call compassionate clarity. Because me walking into an organization and saying you don't know or understand or care about your customers, even if it's true,
Right.
is not going to make me a terribly effective consultant. Right. So coming in and acknowledging the experience, the expertise, the good, and saying, how can I create clarity for these folks in a way that is respectful of them and their talents and their identity. I never realized I necessarily did that consciously, and then somebody called it out one day. But yeah, it is very much an element of communication. Yes, James, more frequently offering an agenda before a meeting. Agendas have fallen off a cliff. They were pretty sporadic at the top of the cliff before, I think, but yeah. I went through a while, and you can't necessarily do this with clients, but I went through a while when I was at Forrester where if someone put a meeting on my calendar and it didn't have an agenda, I just rejected it out of hand. And then if they came back and said, why did you reject us? I would say, you didn't tell me what this meeting is about. How do I know if I need to be there? I was communicating something else. It's probably not the best thing, but yeah, agendas are really helpful.
So it seems to me there's really still some different ways to talk about this topic, right? There is that topic of identity, to talk about mindset, to open it to change, is talking about, again, belonging is the opposite of identity, or another way to say it is they belong. It's nice to feel that you're part of something, whether that's good or bad. It's still an identity that they probably take hold of because otherwise you're on the outside. So there's constantly something you're evaluating on the individuals when you're communicating with them to understand what world are they in? How do I meet them where they're at so that our communication can go the direction that we all hope to go? Because they're also trying to find a common goal in that communication, right? I mean, I think going back to the earlier question of how do you pivot, sometimes if you're pivoting to meet them where they're at, isn't really the goal of the conversation? Or is that just to build trust and maybe eventually pivot, you control the pivot back to where you want to go? So we're all individual people. I mean, this is ironic in the age of AI because AI right now, again, is just one way to do it. How do you get personalized AI over time so that they know you and your communication style? Probably will get them, but that's sort of why, you look back there, not to get into AI rants, but it's so much dependency is happening now with AI. How do we then bridge that gap? I would be curious to say, take the super communicator book concept and how do we adopt it in the world of AI to combat or overcome the trade-offs with overdependence on AI that's going to continue to occur, at least from a corporate standpoint. They're banking on it. They're replacing people with AI because it can do lots of things, but in a genuine way.
Yeah, and I will tell you, Michael, I think some of the AI companies are hedging their bets on that. So I actually tried to, I'm working on a repositioning for the consulting side of my business. And I tried to get AI to just give me a summary of like what it found about me and the themes about what it's like to work with me. And when I asked it to write like a bio, it did. When I asked it to summarize what it's like to work with me, it said, we don't do personal characterization. It was a longer
Oh,
form of that.
interesting.
But it basically said, we will not make judgments or say anything about the emotion or character or anything of a person. It said, we just don't do that. So that was an interesting,
Yeah.
I can imagine the conversations with legal about that. But I just popped something into the chat. I hadn't thought about this until just now that these two were connected, but this article in the most recent version of HBR, Who Are You as a Leader, actually talks about this concept of identity and a structure called an identity map. And it turns out, so my husband is a professor in a business school, and I showed it to him, and he said, "Oh yeah, we do identity maps in school." I was like, "Oh, okay, well, I've never heard of that." And it's been a really interesting exercise, and it's actually changed some of the positioning, because there's aspects of myself that I know and never really thought to bring out. But it's got some instructions on thinking about I don't think you have to be a manager or an executive, but it's particularly timely, and it's a pretty good read.
Thanks for sharing.
You're welcome.
I'll take a look, but is it something you can do on your own, or do you really need to get, 360 kind of feedback to do?
This exercise is really about your own sense of identity. You could do it as more of a 360 exercise. They mean it to be more about, self-reflection and who am I as a leader. I mean, it's basically put some categories on a piece of paper, write down personal traits, group affiliations, all of that, and then put them in concentric circles around a circle that says me, based on sort of how important they are to you as a part of your identity, right? So you might have husband and father in there closer than, experienced designer, whatever those are. And then you start to, it can get a little complicated, but then you start to draw connections between the different identities and start to see what kind of themes come out of that. You can take it as far as not far as you want.
I'm going to do a week-long workshop with myself.
Probably could.
But I'd love that. That doing stuff like that is so powerful, and I don't know whether it's like an extension of or a deep dive into Ikigai or what some people call zone of genius. Zone of genius. I worked with a professional coach for like 6 months on sort of really getting to what is my why behind the why behind the why. Like, what is my identity, and then how do you then talk about that identity? And I think it's part of that book you were talking about, like the habits one, about how you identify with a habit. So it's not like I'm a runner, like I run, and sort of how you then sort of move that and understand yourself better. And then how you then help other people to understand you. I think that stuff it's beautiful.
Oh, and it's so powerful. I think it might have been in that book, there was something about telling housekeepers that in a hotel that they were fit, active people made them expend more energy during the day than just describing what they do, or just not describing them as that. So sort of seeding and anchoring the concept that you are this kind of person. Yeah, that's not like, I'm not a runner.
Was that from the other Duhigg book, The Power of Habit? Is that the one?
I don't remember. It's possibly from that. It is also a big element of Better Than Before by Gretchen Rubin. She actually has a framework. So she wrote The Happiness Project. And I think her second book was Better Than Before. And it was about habit change. And she actually has 4 categories, talk about identity, of your relationship to commitments that you make to yourself and others. So an obliger is someone who puts more emphasis on meeting commitments they make to other people than to themselves. A rebel is someone who puts influence on, or a questioner is somebody who values commitments they make to themselves more than other people. Why should I do that? And she talks about how that part of your identity shapes the strategies you need to use to form and change habits. I have a coach because I am an obliger. I am not paying that person necessarily to help me think about business strategy, although she does that wonderfully. I am paying in part for accountability, because if I know I need to do it, I won't do it. If I've got a meeting with her coming up, I'll do it. And I have accepted that as part of my personality. It's been very freeing. So yeah, that article on identity in HBR, it may be behind a paywall, but I think HBR lets you read 1 or 2 articles ahead of time. I know we're coming up on 4 minutes to the end of the hour. Anything else that anybody wants to add or ask or reflect on before I give you a quick preview of our next book and session?
I do, just real quick. This is the first time I've been to one of these sessions, and this was really great, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm thankful for you organizing it and for everyone in your time.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome. I do this because it's fun. Katie, there is also on the bookclubs.com site, there are recordings. So this is being recorded, and there are recordings of past discussions. So if you wanted to go back and look at some of the past discussions, you certainly can. And we post these up too. To that end, our next session will be June 6th, unless anything happens. And the book that we're going to read is called Reset by Dan Heath.
Yes.
Doug, you suggested it. Gloria suggested it. I posted about it. Dan Heath of Chip and Dan Heath, who wrote Made to Stick, which is a book we read in the past, and Chip wrote Making Numbers Count, which is another book we've read in the past. Dan has a new book out. Full disclosure, I'm only about halfway through it, but knowing Dan, I don't know him personally. I know Chip personally, but knowing them, it's going to be pretty good. So I'm excited about that one. For Q3, the book that I'm leaning towards, this is not final yet because I haven't read it yet. But my friend Kate O'Neill is, she calls herself the tech humanist. And she advises the United Nations on AI. She's a conference speaker. She's just a wonderful human. And she just published her most recent book called What Matters Next. And it's in my home office, so I have to search online to get you the subtitle. Oh, turns out that's a really generic search term. So is the name Kate O'Neill. But it's the subtitle is something about maintaining the human perspective. In an AI world. Sorry, I should have been more prepared with this.
A leader's guide to making human-friendly tech decisions in a world that's moving too fast.
Yes. And the group at the end of last year I had asked about topics you guys wanted to talk about, and AI was one of them. And I came back and said at the time, when I think there's an AI book worth reading, I will do that. I'm waiting for my former colleague Charlene Lee's book to come out as well. That was the one I was aiming for. And then Kate threw this one out. If it turns out to be too dense or too complicated, I will not choose that and do something different. But if you want to get a head start on that for the fall, I think it's going to be a really good read, and it's an important, relevant discussion.
Looks like it's not yet available in Audible, but at the same time, it has an 8-hour rating. Maybe that's just a generic default before the Audible's done.
I will ping Kate and ask about that. I know publishers, some of my friends who've had publishers, either they wait to record it or they release the Audible earlier. So let me ping Kate and see if she has a date on when that will be up. But Cal Newport's Slow Productivity. I haven't read that one yet, James. I've read Deep Work and a couple other of Cal Newport's books. Let me know how that is. And we could potentially do that for Q4. There's something really relaxing about the thought of talking about slow productivity in October and November, because that's not.
It's such the counter to how so many of us have been programmed for so long. And I think for many people, they would dislike it because it is not something that many people get the opportunity to do. But I think it just goes to remind us that if you've got something really important to do it well and do it slowly and precisely. Yeah, it's well written.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things my coach suggested that I talk about when I talk about what I do is I slow you down so you can speed up, because people don't take the time to slow down. Now, whether they think that's a good thing is another story, but we will check that one out. Thank you, everybody. I want to be respectful of your time. I know a lot of you are in far-flung lands. We have lots of note taking. So if whatever synopsis I send out from this AI is missing something that your AI picked up on, such a bizarre conversation, let me know and I will add it. We will post the recording, and then Kate will post, Kate is my operations person. We'll post the information for the next meeting for June 6th and the book sometime next week. But thank you guys, everybody. I really appreciate it.